Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to the meeting. Good evening. Thank you for joining us online as the Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board continues its work through remote communications. My name is Ed Hancock. I am a staff scientist for the Lahontan Regional Water Board. I am joined today by colleagues from the regional and state water board to host an update and question and answer session on the Lahontan region's bacteria water quality objectives evaluation project. So before we go any further, if everyone on the call could just take a moment to make sure that their participant name reflects the name that they registered with through the registration service. If you need to rename yourself, you use the three little buttons which are next to your name on the screen, and you can rename yourself that way. So I want to thank those of you who have already spoken with us regarding your interests and concerns about this project. The purpose of the meeting this evening is to provide a forum for you to ask questions regarding this project and have staff respond. This meeting will conclude once all participants have had a chance to ask questions that they may have and provide water board staff with observations about the project. I hope that everyone online this evening has taken the time to review the video presentation that was circulated via email and posted on the regional board website in mid-July. The links to the project information have been shared in the meeting notices for this event, the most recent of which was circulated yesterday. The website address for this information is displayed on this slide, and the video presentation contains information intended to bring you up to speed on the status of this project and also to foster a discussion between us this evening. If you haven't had a chance to review the video presentation yet, but you are worried that you may miss important information in this question and answer session, the session this evening will be recorded and will be made available on the project website. I will be giving a very brief overview of the project in just a minute, but I highly recommend you review the video presentation if you have not done so already. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Marina Perez, who will be our facilitator this evening. Marina is a manager with the Office of Public Participation at the Water Board. So Marina, over to you.
Thanks, Ed. Welcome and thank you for joining this question and answer session for the Lahontan Region Bacterial Water Quality Objectives Evaluation Project. My name is Marina Perez, and I'm a manager with the State Water Board's Office of Public Participation. I will be your meeting facilitator. This meeting is being held virtually and is being recorded and webcast publicly. This workshop is for informational purposes and no formal action will be taken. I'd like to start our presentation by acknowledging and honoring the groups who have experienced economic, environmental, and social disadvantages as a result of historical marginalization. We recognize that we are meeting during a very challenging time. We recognize the impact this global pandemic has had and will have on marginalized communities. Our work here today supports Indigenous and community voices as we work together to provide clean, safe, affordable water to all Californians. We want to thank each of you for finding a way to join us virtually today. We thank you for your patience and understanding as we move to a 100% virtual meeting space so that we can adapt to the current public health concerns. We are doing our best to make sure that everyone can participate in an effective way and that this time is valuable for you. Now, I'd like to share some information on the meeting guidelines and logistics. We encourage you to take breaks as you need them. Also, we encourage you to take care of, everybody to take care of themselves. We want to make clear that the purpose of this workshop is to provide an opportunity to respond to your questions or comments about this project. Please feel free to ask for clarification on any concerns or questions you may have, or in any of the information included in the video presentation. Also, there will be another opportunity to provide comments or questions on this project at the Lahontan Water Board meeting scheduled for November 2020. A summary of the questions and comments received today will also be shared with board members. A big thank you to all who have submitted questions prior to this meeting. Previously submitted questions and comments will be presented first during the live question and answer session. However, there will be an opportunity for additional comments to be made throughout this during this session. A few ways to ask questions. You can submit your questions via email. You can email your questions or comments to the Lahontan Bacteria Objectives at waterboards.ca.gov. Please include a Q&A session, question or comment in the subject line, and provide the following: your first and last name, who you represent, whether you represent yourself, another person, or an organization, whether you would like to read your question or comment yourself, or if you would like a staff member to read it for you, and of course, your concise question or comment. Another option to submit questions or comments is via Zoom. You may also present your questions or comments live through Zoom. You can, to do so, please use the raise hand function found at the bottom of the participants window on the right hand of the Zoom screen. Once you have raised your hand, please wait for your name to be called. So at this moment, let's take a second to practice this feature. Could everyone that's participating via the Zoom platform raise their hand? Great. We've seen some hands go up. Very good. Okay. Thanks so much. So that is how you can submit your question or comment via Zoom. You can raise your hand and we will call upon you. The third option, of course, is to participate via phone. If you are participating by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand. When called upon, press *6 to unmute yourself. When you have finished your comment or question, please press *6 to mute yourself. Questions and comments will be addressed by staff from the Lahontan Water Board's Planning and Assessment Unit and staff from the State Water Board's Office of Information Management and Assessment, and they will be introduced in a moment. We also have staff working behind the scenes to make sure that we have as few participation bumps as possible. Now, I'd like to hand the mic back to Ed Hancock. Ed, take it away.
Thanks, Marina, and thanks to all of those who have taken the time to attend this evening's session. Before we get into the interactive portion of the meeting, I will give a quick overview of the project to refresh our memories. As I mentioned previously, I hope that everyone has taken some time to review the project video presentation available on the website, as this information was designed to bring you up to speed on the status of this project and help begin a discussion today. There is also other information pertaining to the project available on the webpage. Today's meeting slides were sent to registered meeting participants ahead of this meeting, and those links that you see on your screen now will be accessible via those slides should you need them. So the next few slides will recap some project information, the project timeline, the purpose of the project, and a quick look at some of the potential project strategies that were introduced to you in the information video. After that, we will move on to the interactive portion of this evening's meeting. So looking at the project timeline, the Lahontan Water Board made this project a top planning priority in November 2018 during the 3-year review of the Basin Plan. Staff began working on the project in July 2019 with the conclusion of some other priority projects. As some of you will be aware, Water Board staff had planned a series of 4 in-person workshops throughout the region in March 2020. Unfortunately, the shelter-in-place orders to protect public health because of COVID-19 were enacted the week prior to these meetings, leading to their postponement. Staff understand that there is interest from around the region in this project, and therefore it is important that we meet online now, even with the restrictions of shelter in place and social distancing. So in May 2020, we circulated a survey to ask you the best way for you to receive information about this project. We overwhelmingly heard that despite the pandemic, you were prepared to engage with us and could do so via web-based meetings, which brings us together this evening. In mid-July, we circulated the video presentation that I referred to earlier, and today, in early August, we are together for this live event. Staff are aware that nothing can fully substitute a face-to-face meeting, and it is the intent of staff to hold such meetings when it becomes safe to do so. However, as I talk about in the information video, there are some issues related to this project that staff and interested parties should engage on early in the process, so it is useful that technology can facilitate the meeting between us now. And looking ahead, on November 18th or 19th, 2020, staff will brief the Lahontan Water Board regarding this project, at which time the board may offer direction to staff. Members of the public and representatives from other organizations are encouraged to participate in board proceedings. And then looking at next year, early in 2021, staff tentatively plan to begin the CEQA process for the project, which is a necessary legal process when making changes to environmental regulations in California. So why is there the need for the Bacteria Water Quality Objectives Evaluation Project? Well, the project is a result of the Lahontan region currently having 2 bacteria water quality objectives that apply to our surface waters. One of these objectives is contained in the basin plan for the region and uses fecal coliform as the indicator bacteria. This objective applies to all surface waters in the Lahontan region. The second objective uses Escherichia coli, also known as E. coli, as the indicator, and this objective applies statewide in California to waters where the water contact recreation, also called REC 1, beneficial use applies. This objective was adopted in 2018 by the State Water Board. The E. coli objective sets a threshold of unacceptable risk of sickness in people if they contact water polluted above this level. So each objective provides a different water quality protection. The Basin Plan Fecal Coliform objective is highly protective of water quality, while the statewide E. coli objective sets a threshold for an acceptable risk of sickness in humans. Having 2 objectives that apply in the region is causing issues for the Water Board and some of the processes the Water Board is legally required to participate in, and for the regulated community in the region who have to contend with 2 different objectives ostensibly designed to do a similar thing, which is to regulate the pollution of Lahontan surface waters by fecal waste. Another reason for this project relates to the advancement of scientific understanding regarding fecal indicator bacteria, such as fecal coliform and E. coli. Modern science has identified that fecal pollution is common in the environment and modern science has identified that fecal coliform is common in the environment and is not the best indicator of recent harmful fecal pollution in favor of E. coli as a more accurate indicator. So remember, this science only applies to the indicator itself rather than a numeric threshold used for regulatory purposes. So with that in mind, there are some goals for this project. One is to update the Basin Plan to reflect modern science. Another is to provide regulatory clarity, both for the regulated community and for Water Board staff. Another goal is to ensure that the Lahontan region's high quality waters remain protected. As many of you are aware, the region enjoys high quality water resources originating in our mountainous headwaters areas, and these water bodies provide high quality water to many other parts of the state and our state neighbors for drinking, recreation, ecological, and other purposes. So I will now go over a few of the potential project scenarios, project options. Please remember that none of these potential options I'm about to talk about or which I discussed in the video presentation are settled upon. I am not presenting an exhaustive list, but I am sharing this information with you now to illustrate some of the potential scenarios for the project. One of the reasons we are meeting this evening is to get your take on steps forward for the project. So please feel free to ask questions, to share your views in a few moments when we begin the interactive portion of this evening's meeting. So one option for the project might be to remove the fecal coliform objective of the basin plan in favor of the statewide E. coli objective. This would deal with some of the regulatory issues we face, but it could also leave our high quality waters open to unregulated degradation in the future. Another option would be to rely on the E. coli REC1 objective to protect human health, and then go a step further and develop a numeric guideline for bacteria pollution in high quality waters, which would serve as a benchmark of good water quality. This guideline would not be a legally enforceable water quality objective, but it could be used for anti-degradation analyses in a regulatory setting. Another option might be to modernize the fecal coliform objective in the basin plan to use E. coli as the indicator bacteria and keep the current basin plan objectives numeric threshold. Another approach similar to this might be to develop a new beneficial use to protect our high quality waters and develop an objective using E. coli to protect such a use. And I should also make clear that any new use and corresponding objective would only be designated to specific waters in the region which are of a certain quality. So as you can see, there are an array of possibilities, all of which deserve discussion, including some which perhaps have not been proposed. So again, I want to reiterate that no one of these strategies is final and no strategy has been decided upon yet. So what are the next steps for the project? Well, staff will continue developing a suite of project strategies, hopefully with input from you, from interested parties. A report of these strategies will be presented to the Lahontan Water Board at the November 2020 board meeting. And at this meeting, staff will brief the board on project information, and the board may provide direction to staff regarding the project. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, you are encouraged to participate in this process. Project staff, we want to hear from you. What are your concerns or thoughts about the project? Do you have questions or something you would like clarification on? As Marina mentioned a few minutes ago, tonight is not your only opportunity to communicate with Water Board staff. My contact information will be available at the end of this presentation, and it is on the project website. So please reach out to me to discuss your concerns at any time. And this leads us to the next stage of this evening, our interactive question and comment period. Again, this is your opportunity to participate early in this project. Your questions and comments are important. Please feel free to ask any questions and provide your observations about the project and about bacteria water quality. And here is the information to submit your questions and comments. We will begin reviewing and answering some questions that we received prior to today. And after we get through these questions, we will turn our attention to those questions and comments that might be in the audience tonight. So with that, I will hand back over to Marina, our facilitator, to introduce some of the staff who will help answering questions with me. Marina, back to you.
Thanks very much, Ed, for providing a great project overview and refreshing our memories about this project. We will now transition into the question and answer session. As Ed stated earlier, we will take questions and comments that were submitted to us prior to today's event. We will then take live questions or comments from the audience. Questions and comments will be answered by a panel of subject matter experts. The panel will consist of Ed Hancock, who you just heard from, Marissa Van Dyke. Marissa is a scientist from the Office of Information Management and Analysis at the State Water Board, who is a microbiologist by training. Dan Sussman. Dan is an environmental scientist, senior environmental scientist, pardon me, and the program manager for the Planning and Assessment Unit with the Lahontan Water Board. and Elizabeth Barrett, the Lahontan Water Board staff attorney. The questions received for this project will be presented by Cindy Weiss, a water resources control engineer with the planning unit with the Lahontan Water Board. Following this session, we will have the opportunity to hear from you to respond to questions and comments related to this project. Questions can be submitted again, as mentioned earlier, by email to Lahontan Bacteria Objectives at waterboards.ca.gov. Please provide your full name, who you represent, either yourself, another person, or an organization, whether you will read your question or would like staff to read your question, your concise project-related question or comment. Also, you can participate via Zoom. You can submit your question or comment via Zoom. And to do so, please raise your hand as we practiced earlier, and we will call upon you. The other method, of course, is through phone. If you're using your phone, we ask you to press *9, raise your hand. Once you are called upon, you may press *6 to unmute yourself. As with the email instructions for submitting questions or comments, please make sure you provide your full name, who you're representing, and your precise project-related question or comment. In order to ensure we can respond to as many questions and comments, we ask that you please keep your questions or comments related to the project and as concise as possible. Additionally, questions and comments received during this project will be posted in a frequently asked or FAQ document and in a meeting minutes document after the meeting. As we receive questions, Cindy Weiss from the Lahontan Regional Water Board will read the questions received. And as mentioned earlier, the questions will be addressed by our panel of subject matter experts, Ed, Marissa, and Dan. I will now turn the mic over to Cindy Weiss to read the submitted questions and comments. Cindy?
Good evening, everyone. Prior to today's event, we received a total of 3 questions that each have multiple parts, and we also received a comment. The questions and the comments all came from Lori Kemper, who identifies herself as a concerned resident of South Lake Tahoe. The first question is, in option 2, what does a guideline really do? I get that the region won't have to list waters as impaired, but will you be able to take any regulatory actions based on a guideline? Would you be able to reduce existing grazing in an area, for example? Would the board be able to prevent new activities which might contribute to bacterial contamination, such as new development on septic systems, increased grazing, horse stables, etc.? For this first question, I will ask Ed to respond.
Thanks a lot, Cindy, and thanks to Ms. Kemper for this question. I think just the last part of that question was, would the board be able to prevent new activities which might contribute bacteria contamination, such as septic systems, horse stables, etc.? I do think that it brings up some important aspects related to the option 2 scenario that was presented in the video presentation. And first off, I want to be clear that under this option, any numeric guideline developed through the project is not aimed at reducing existing land uses, be that recreation, be that grazing, or any other type of development. The intent of such a numeric guideline is to recognize surface waters in the region that are of superior microbial quality, superior bacterial quality. Such waters, as I mentioned a few slides ago, are often found in the mountainous headwaters region, portions of the region, or undeveloped watersheds, as in naturally occurring watersheds. And these waters are valuable resources for municipal, recreational, cultural, and ecological purposes. The statewide E. coli objective effectively sets an acceptable risk of sickness in humans, but this objective may not be the best tool to ensure the ongoing protection of high-quality surface waters enjoyed in the Lahontan region. And in the regulatory scenario that Ms. Kemper alludes to, the numeric guideline presented in option 2 would provide a benchmark, if you will, for permit writers to begin their permit analysis. So an anti-degradation tool, essentially. The intent of the guideline is also to provide, or would be to provide, institutional memory related to bacteria water quality that is housed in the basin plan and is therefore accessible for all basin plan users, be they water board staff, external organizations, or private individuals with an interest in water quality. Such a numeric benchmark would not prevent new activities or changes to land uses, but it would be a tool to help guide sustainable and appropriate development adjacent to high quality waters. So watersheds where this numeric guideline would apply are by definition high quality. And what a numeric benchmark would do in the regulatory setting is provide a flag that close analyses are required prior to taking any actions that might impact bacteria water quality in such a watershed. So I guess an example might be a situation where a new campground is proposed in a previously undeveloped or unimpacted watershed where such a new numeric guideline might apply. And in this situation, the permit writer, whoever that might be, will have information contained in the basin plan that bacteria water quality is really at a level well below the threshold to impair the water contact recreation beneficial use. So they would begin their analysis there instead of at the E. coli water quality objective threshold. And this does not mean that they cannot permit an action that impacts bacteria water quality, but it does mean that there has to be justification to impact water quality for these particular valuable surface waters. And the permit analysis may result in certain conditions or management practices implemented through the permit, which are focused on preserving water quality in the region. And I think that was a long-winded way of answering your question, Ms. Kemper, but there's a lot of information that goes into option 2.
Okay, our next question, also from Lori Kemper. I'm a little confused between option 3 and 4. In one option, will the 18 E. coli objective be applied everywhere in the region that currently identifies REC 1 as a beneficial use? And the other option, it will only be applied to a set number of water bodies. Ed, could you answer this question?
Yeah, I think that's project related. So first, let me apologize. I think I could have done a better job explaining the difference between these two options in the information video. As you guessed, Ms. Kemper, the differences are a little nuanced, and I will attempt to offer clarification now. So option 3, the proposition would be to rely on the statewide E. coli water contact recreation objective for the protection of human health. It would be a human health backstop, if you will. So additionally to this, and in recognition of the high quality waters that exist in certain locations in the region, the fecal coliform objective that currently is in the basin plan would be updated to use E. coli as the indicator bacteria, a move which really reflects the state of microbial water quality science. But this updated objective would remain at the same level of protection that currently exists. However, because there are certain surface waters in the region where attainment of this threshold is not likely to happen, this updated objective would actually be removed from specific waters, which instead would be protected by this E. coli human health backstop. So examples of such surface waters where this designation might occur are Tallac Creek, for example, in the Tahoe Basin, where we see a volume of wildlife in Tallac Meadow that actually delivers a large volume of bacteria to the creek, or surface waters in the Bridgeport Valley, where ranching and agricultural uses have been the predominant uses for generations. And actually, in both cases, the current fecal coliform objective is rarely, if ever, attained. So this option adds some flexibility to the regulations and reflects some of the situations occurring in each watershed. So moving on to option 4, and this is actually, I think, where the nuance comes in, the statewide E. coli objective would again be the human health backstop. But under this scenario, rather than simply translate the fecal coliform objective to use E. coli, instead, we would designate a new beneficial use, an objective designed specifically to protect that use. So such a new beneficial use might reflect uses related to high quality waters. Some use that is enhanced by having exceptionally low levels of bacteria contamination. So, this is something that is still under discussion between staff, but, such a use will have ties to recreation or to cultural values. The objective to protect this new use would then be developed using the region-wide E. coli data set that the Water Board has spent the past dozen or so years collecting. Based on these data, it is very likely, actually, that the new objective would be analogous to the current fecal coliform threshold. But the important thing to understand in this situation is that whatever that new numeric threshold is, would actually be derived on current data that reflects ambient conditions in our high quality regional surface waters. So again, I want to stress that in this scenario, we're only talking about surface waters which enjoy very low bacteria pollution, such as Lake Tahoe or any number of high elevation surface waters. For surface waters in watersheds where specific uses actually preclude high quality microbial waters, such as in extensively grazed watersheds or urban developed lands or high recreation areas, the E. coli water contact recreation, that REC1 objective, would likely be the only bacteria objective to apply.
Okay, thank you. Our third question is, what about an option that sets 18 E. coli for all Sierra Nevada waters above 5,000 foot elevation or above the base of the Eastern Escarpment, and maybe additional high quality waters in the San Bernardino, San Gabriel, or Warner Mountains?
Excuse me, Cindy, for the record, can you please state that person's name?
This is a question again from Lori Kemper. It's the third of her 3 questions.
Thank you very much.
Ed, are you okay with answering this, or do you want me to read the question again?
I think so, but Dan, Marissa, please feel free to jump in. The short answer is I think that's a really great idea, and actually has been part of the conversation and calculus related to this project. I think the beneficial use we were protecting under this scenario might be something along the lines that I just described for project option 4 just a few moments ago, where we identify a use that is dependent on high quality waters at these specific elevations. Again, that could be cultural or recreationally related. Additionally, I might add, though, on this thought that while many of our water bodies at elevation do enjoy really good water quality in terms of bacteria, there are others which are affected in some way by some form of development, be that high use recreation areas or grazing related, etc. And we would need to account for that. So it might not be as simple as just saying that everything above elevation X gets designated this protection. But I do appreciate this suggestion. I think that it would be prudent to include it in the list of potential options for the project, and I certainly think it deserves a close analysis. So thank you for that suggestion.
Okay, and then finally, We have a comment also from Lori Kemper, and Lori writes, I definitely support some type of option that sets an E. coli numeric objective similar to the current 20 fecal coliform per 100 milliliter objective for most waters in the Lahontan region, especially for those waters that are routinely used for water contact recreation. I am concerned about relaxing bacteria water quality standards in the Lahontan region, and I support an E. coli standard that correlates to the existing fecal coliform standard.
Yeah, this is Ed again. Thank you for that comment. I think that it drives to one of the major issues that we have with this project, which is we are fortunate to enjoy very high quality waters in the Lahontan region. We provide these high quality water resources to other parts of the state and to our state neighbors. And the current E. coli water quality objective, while it is very good for human health protection, it may not be as useful for some of these cultural and ecological values that we also have to consider. So yeah, thanks to Ms. Kemper for her questions and her observations. They have definitely been noted, and we appreciate your interest.
All right, we have another question from Nathan Reed, who is the agricultural, oops, just 1 minute here, sorry. I'm sorry, he's the agricultural commissioner and the director of weights and measures for Inyo and Mono County. Mr. Reed's question is, an option 4 was briefly mentioned that allows for certain waters to be identified as high quality, which would have different standards for them. Who would make that determination and how? And I will direct this question to Dan Sussman, please. Thank you.
Hi, Cindy, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Reed. I think that Ed might have gotten a ways towards answering this question while answering some of Ms. Kemper's questions as well. To identify which waters would be determined and how would be a process that the Water Board would internally develop, probably working with some of those, looking at the data and the land uses and the beneficial uses that we are meant to protect. And then since this would be part of a public process for changing our standards or for designating new standards to our waters, then that would have a robust public input to have input on that process and how to determine which waters would be eligible. So in short, staff would similarly, as I discussed in the last round of questions, staff would develop an approach and apply that approach and bring that to the public, and the public would review it and have an opportunity to influence it if we are off base or if there's another better way of doing things or to answer questions. Is there any, Ed, would you add anything to that, or?
Yeah, I think I would just reiterate that it would be a data-driven exercise, be that water quality data that, you know, we've spent those many years now collecting for E. coli, and also a land use assessment exercise as well. I think that we know, we have a pretty good idea of where our really high quality waters are and where our waters that perhaps are of less quality in terms of bacteria are as well. And that would all be part of the assessment, a part of the calculus. And, you know, anything that we developed internally would of course go out for review with the public. It would be part of the public process. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting tonight, we are really interested to hear from folks on the ground as well. So hopefully that those bits of information that we can gather from folks around the region would go into whatever calculus and approach was taken in terms of where to add extra protections and where to rely solely on the E. coli objective.
Okay, our next question, there's actually 5 questions that all came from Eric Miller, who is an interested party in the event that our actions are taken up by 3 other regional boards, namely the Los Angeles Regional Board, the Santa Ana Regional Board, and the San Diego Regional Water Boards. So I will start off by reading the first question. What does superior microbial quality, does superior microbial quality of natural waters account for naturally occurring microbial contamination from natural wildlife? And Marissa, would you like to answer this one, please?
Hello, yeah, this is Marissa Van Dyke of the State Water Board. I can attempt answering this question along with perhaps some help with Ed about the definition of this. Thank you for your question, Eric. So with microbial contamination, we're aware that, naturally occurring wildlife in the area does contribute fecal waste to waterways and along with other contamination from human activities. So when we talk about the microbial quality of waters, we do take into account both wildlife and humans. Though I'd like to refer back to Ed on if this definition of superior microbial quality has been defined by the Lahontan region, as I don't want to step in as for coming from the State Board.
Not in any official capacity, but generally that is surface waters where bacteria concentrations are generally very, very low or non-detect. So really, we're not seeing any bacteria concentrations in those particular waters. There is no definition for superior microbial quality, but perhaps they could be through the process of this project.
Okay, so then in summary, the microbial contamination or fecal waste could come from natural wildlife and also from human inputs as well.
Okay, our next question, which is also from Mr. Eric Miller. How does adopting the state's metric endanger Region 6's water? Fecal and E. coli are not interchangeable, so lower fecal does not equal E. coli. Ed or Marissa, you want to take a stab
I'm
at that
happy
one?
to start on that one, and Marissa, perhaps you could help me out. But so Escherichia coli is actually a subset of fecal coliform. I guess that the issue that we have now is that the E. coli objective adopted by the State Water Board really was developed to protect human health. But when you look at the regional data set that we have here in the Lahontan region, E. coli concentrations are a lot, quite significantly lower than the threshold for the water quality objective. So to answer your question, how does adopting the state's metric endanger Region 6's waters? Really, it opens them up to unregulated degradation, potentially, whereby we would not have a mechanism potentially to identify surface waters that are being impacted in some way by bacteria before it was too late, if you will, before beneficial uses became impaired. As to the second part of that question about fecal coliform and E. coli not being interchangeable, they are two separate organisms, it's true, but they are related. I wonder if Marissa could help me out with an explanation there.
Yeah, that's right, Ed. I'm happy to try to elaborate a little bit more on this question. So, as Ed said, they're not equivalent, though they are related. So, when you think, like, just taking a step back, fecal coliform refers to a large group of bacteria, organisms that are known to occur in the intestines of mammals and occur with fecal waste. And so it's a larger group of many different species. And then when we're looking at E. coli criteria that's specific to one species or one member of that fecal coliform group, we're definitely looking at a different subset of the coliform organisms. So you're right, Eric, that E. coli and fecal coliform are not interchangeable, though again they are related because E. coli is a member of that fecal group. And so imagine, if the next steps were to derive an E. coli, an E. coli criteria based off of the current fecal coliform objective, there would be, again, a data-driven exercise where you'd go back to the data set where you derive the fecal coliform criteria and derive one that's specific to E. coli, taking into account the differences and some of their similarities. And that would be done if that option were to be pursued. Back to you, Cindy.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I know we have
Cindy,
a few people.
This is Dan
Dan's on.
Suss, and I just want to make one clarification on the answer to the first part of this question, which was, how does adopting the state's metric endanger Region 6's waters? And I just want to be clear that the state board, when they adopted their metric, it already does apply to our region. And so in terms of adopting it, it applies. We, in the future, would amend our basin plan to reference it and to recognize it within the pages of our basin plan that it applies. But for all intents and purposes, it applies statewide and region-wide for all our Rec 1 waters. And so it's less adopting that, but how would removing our existing or changing our existing region-wide objective without some other substitute and just having the statewide metric, how would that endanger Region 6 waters? And that is what Ed, I think, was getting to with his answer. Thank you.
Okay, and I just wanted to acknowledge that we know there's some people that have raised their hands in Zoom to ask questions, and we will get to those in just a minute. So thank you for your patience. Our next question, which is also from Mr. Miller, is how has the Water Board attempted to separate American beaver fecal coliform contributions from sources that pose human health concerns? And I will just ask the panel to answer that question. Thank you. And I'll read it one more time. How has the Water Board attempted to separate American beaver fecal coliform contributions from sources that pose human health concerns?
This is Marissa Van Dyke. I can try to start answering this question. The panel concurs?
Yes, please.
Okay,
please,
so this is Marissa Van Dyke, again, from the State Water Board. So going to this question, how do you differentiate between, fecal coliform or fecal waste from an American beaver or specific animal species from sources, from other sources? So to look at this, there are ways to analyze what the animal source was from fecal waste that are in a waterway. We call this microbial source tracking. So we're going back to looking at the microbes or the fecal waste and using genetic analyses to determine which source the fecal waste came from. So we can go back to if it's specifically to human waste, to cows, to some waterfowl, some other specific mammals as well. And there is, again, also a way to go back and look at the source from beavers as well. So those kind of studies have been applied at different regional boards as part of larger water board studies on specific watersheds or specific water bodies that are impacted by fecal waste. So there are ways to look at a waterway that does have fecal contamination that appears to be mostly from beavers. Again, like the microbe source tracking research does give you a good indicator of what the sources are of the fecal waste, but it's not necessarily a definitive and tells you exact amounts of what waste came from which species of animals. So there's quite a bit of data interpretation in there. And so we can do that to understand a little bit more about a specific water body or watershed. And I'm sure if you have a certain water body in mind that you'd like to have more information on, if a certain species or beavers were mostly contributing to the waste, sure we could talk about that further with the Lahontan staff. And I'll pass this on to Ed and Dan for any additional clarification.
Yeah, thanks, Marissa. This is Ed Hancock again from the regional board. I think it would be very useful to understand, Mr. Miller, if you have a particular water body in mind. As Marissa said, microbial source tracking would be one way to separate contributions from different sources within a water body. Excuse me. So yeah, perhaps we could continue this conversation offline, over email, via telephone, at a way that suits you, or today as a follow-up question. But Dan, did you have anything to add on this?
No, I don't. I think that no, I do not.
Okay, our next question also from Eric Miller. At what level does the fecal coliform contamination result in human health impacts similar to the E. coli metric? And again, I will ask the panel to answer this question.
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. This is Marissa Van Dyke again from the State Water Board. I'll start by trying to answer this question as well. So earlier, Ed showed some slides that described how the E. coli versus fecal coliform criteria were derived and what it was protecting. So your question's comparing are the health impacts similar from the E. coli metric and the fecal coliform metric. So I'll go back to the fecal coliform metric that Lahontan has, which is which I'm sure you're quite familiar with. It was derived to prevent one or less illness per 1,000 exposures in the population that are recreating in the waterway. So that's at one level. And then the E. coli metric that the Water Board adopted was developed to protect to actually allow a few more illnesses and again 1,000 exposures. So it does have a tolerance of up to 32 illnesses per 1,000 exposures or people recreating in a waterway. So the criteria are protecting human exposure and contamination from fecal waste a little differently. And so if you want to derive a level, to be similar from the fecal coliform to the E. coli, we'd have to go back to the data set on how each of these criteria were developed to then derive an equivalent from the fecal coliform to the E. coli metric. And I don't believe that has been done in this circumstance, but perhaps we can follow up in the future if the next steps warrant this kind of a data-driven exercise.
Yeah, this is
Go ahead, Ed.
Ed Hancock again from the regional board. Just to kind of build on what Marissa has said, you know, fecal coliform has been around for a long time. The method of measuring water and using fecal coliform, you know, really dates back to perhaps the early 20th century. And there have not been as many epidemiological studies, so the studies of cause and effect as related to fecal coliform, as there have been in recent history for E. coli. And what this means is that E. coli has a body of science now where a cause effect relationship has been determined between levels of E. coli measured in the surface water and instances of human illness. So I think that your question, you know, what about the level of fecal coliform contamination resulting in human health impacts is a really interesting one. That particular epidemiological survey has not been completed in recent scientific history, shall we say, in the last 30 or so years at least. You know, that's part of the reason for this particular evaluation project. There has been some significant strides forward in microbial water quality science, and you know, that is a reason why we are looking at this fecal coliform objective and determining whether or not it should be updated in our basin plan.
Okay, our last and final question from Mr. Miller. He writes, I read an executive officer's report from Region 6 citing a prior report by SNARL, and I'll fill in that that is the UC Santa Barbara, Sierra Nevada Aquatic Research Lab. So citing a prior report by SNARL that concluded the cattle was the main source. I would note that they did not use a bovine-specific genetic test, but rather one for ruminants in general. Further, their method of parsing out the vertebrate contributions was inconsistent with modern science and reports from SWRCB, which is the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, I believe that's the acronym he was using, as microbial source tracking results are not comparable between test types. Results from one MST for ruminants cannot be directly compared to MST results for birds. The MST results are each on a separate scale.
Yeah, thank you for that statement, Mr. Miller. This is Ed Hancock again at the regional board. I would like to elaborate a little bit on the work that the Sierra Nevada Aquatic Research Lab has done. Mr. Miller is quite right when he says that they did not use a bovine-specific genetic test, but they did use a ruminant marker in that study. Ruminants pick up things like cattle, deer, a couple of other species in there. I would like to clarify that they performed a relationship analysis in their work where they actually looked at concentrations of fecal indicator bacteria that were collected at the same time during the same sampling event as their MST samples. And they determined a relationship between changes in this case, E. coli, and changes in the MST results or MST data that they were seeing. Mr. Miller is very right that MST markers are not comparable between test types, but I want to be clear that SNARL did not compare MST markers to other MST markers. Rather, they compared it to fecal indicator bacteria data that was collected concurrently. So, you know, the statement that results from ruminants cannot be directly compared to results for birds is absolutely correct. That is not the case for the SNARL work For those who are perhaps unaware, the Water Board entered into a series of 3 contracts with the Sierra Nevada Aquatic Research Lab from approximately 2011 through 2016. So in these work, they pursued a relationship analysis rather than a comparison analysis between test types.
Okay, if the panel has no other responses to add to that, we're going to transition now to our live questions. So thank you again to our participants who've been patiently waiting with their hand up, and Marina will field those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy, for handling all these pre-submitted questions. I really appreciate that. At this portion, we will now address folks who have been so patiently waiting with their hands raised, and we will go in the order that they were raised. I just wanted to remind you that as I unmute you, if you can please state your name, the organization that you represent or the people that you represent, and a concise question or comment. So the first person, we have 3 hands that have been up. The first person is Tess Dunham.
Thank you. Yes, this is Tess Dunham. I am an attorney at Consories in Conway and Sacramento, and I represent some of the livestock interests in the Bridgeport Valley and the Centennial Livestock Company. And my question pertains to the options, and specifically the application of the anti-degradation policy. In listening to the descriptions of the options as they've been presented, as well as some of the responses to questions that have been posed, it appears to me that the Lahontan board hasn't completely considered the proper application of the anti-degradation policy. And in fact, I think there was one statement by one of the staff in response to a question that claimed that adoption or application of the state standards would essentially leave unregulated degradation. And the anti-degradation policy is there as that backstop, right? We have water quality objectives that protect use impairment, which are there to protect the beneficial uses. And then we have the application of the state and federal anti-degradation policies, which always apply to our high quality waters. So it seems to me that option 2, while it appears to try to get to the anti-degradation policy, none of the options fully explore and explain how the anti-degradation policy would work as the backstop for these high quality waters. And my question is, why is that? Why have the options not included a further explanation as to how the anti-degradation policy would work to protect high quality waters in conjunction with use impairment thresholds, such as the state's recreational bacteria objectives?
So who on that panel would like to respond to Tess's question?
Yeah, this is Ed Hancock again from
Thanks,
the
Ed.
regional board. I'll begin, and Dan, please feel free to add to what I'm about to say.
Thank you.
I will thank you, Ms. Dunham. Appreciate your question a lot. I think that it's important to recognize that we are very early in the project process. And as I mentioned at the beginning of today's meeting and on the video as well, none of the options that have been presented to you are final. They're all in development. We have presented them to you as potential ways to move forward. I think that your points to the anti-degradation policy 6816 are very valuable and very valid, and that has certainly been part of our internal conversation. How do we how does 6816 fit in to our particular process? I will say that in option 2, the numeric guideline is really just that. It is a guideline for particular surface waters, potential guideline, I should say, for particular surface waters that would really be a flag, if you will. So, you know, years from now, you know, perhaps 30 or so years from now, there aren't people wondering where they should begin. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago during this conversation, that guideline would not preclude development. It would not be a legally enforceable objective, but it would be a marker, a flag, if you will. So Dan, I wonder if you could elaborate at all on what I just said.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. And thank you again, Tess, for your question, because you point something out, which is that 6816 is the policy that is there to protect our high quality waters when you have an example such as we've given, where the water quality is higher, is better water quality with lower bacteria counts than those in the objective. And I think what you're getting to is to figure out what are the mechanics with which we would apply 6816 to ensure that those waters are protected and that there is not automatically an allowance given to whatever permitted activity is there to make the water quality go from where it is pre-project or pre-activity to the objective. And I'm being reminded, this is Dan Sussman, Senior Environmental Scientist, to introduce myself. One of the options, option 2, as Ed just described, is one way that we could go about doing this, where we say, look, this is the numeric guideline for that water body. That way, when our permitting staff are assessing to themselves when they're developing a permit, what should the allowable water quality be in that particular water body, when here it is, we know it's better than the existing water quality objective. They can start at that level and then do the analysis and see if they should allow some degradation up to the water quality objective or not. That is one option. Another option would be, and another option could be to require some period of monitoring to ensure that we have a number for that water body. And so, say project applicant, this sounds like a great project that we will be permitting, and we need you to also provide us with X amount of data so that our permitting staff can apply. These are the mechanics that, as Ed says, we are very much early in this process. Should we choose project option 2 or some of the or any other options, we need to account for protecting these high quality waters. How we figure out exactly how to do that has been some point of discussion internally, and there's several ways of doing that, whether it be in the basin plan, outside the basin plan, with a numeric guideline. These are questions and discussions that we are really having still. And so depending on which project options we go through, the answer to that question, we will develop in response to that. And of course, since this is a public process, the public would have opportunity to weigh in. So thank you for identifying this as really a key part of where we've been spending our brain power on this project. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Dan. So we've had some raised hands, and there were 2 hands. I think we may have lost one person, but I just want to remind everybody that's participating is that if you have a question or comment that you'd like to ask, please use the raise hand function, and we will get to you in the order that the hands are raised. So the next person we have is Lori Kemper. Lori, if you can please introduce yourself and indicate if you know who you're representing, if it's yourself or an organization, and if you can please provide a concise comment or question.
Thank you, Marina. My name's Lori Kemper, and I'm a resident of the Sierra Nevada. And I thank you, Ed, for answering my earlier questions I sent in by email. That helped a lot. I may have more questions in the future, but I have a question and a comment. How have you conducted outreach to Native American communities? I guess I'm surprised that someone's not on the call, or I don't recognize names like from the Paiute tribe down in Bishop. But can you answer that question for me?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Laurie. This is Ed Hancock from the regional board. We have noticed the tribes in our region, both via email and via paper mail. I would also mention that Brianna Vaughan is on this call. She's the water quality coordinator for the Paiute tribe. So I hope that answers your question a little bit,
Yeah.
Laurie. We have been making an effort with the tribes. Obviously, when we get to 2021 and into the official CEQA process, we will have our own AB 52 things to do then. But they have been included as much as possible in our messaging, so via email and paper mail, as I mentioned. So yeah.
Thank you. All right, thank you. That's helpful. And then my comment, and I know that we have someone from State Board on the call, and maybe just for the public, just to be aware that, I mean, I guess my biggest concern is that the new State Board E. coli standard is a risk-based standard, as you mentioned. I don't think, I mean, it's not a health-based standard, and I don't find it protective of human health. In other words, the State Board decided for all Californians and visitors to the state that an acceptable risk is 32 times worse than the standard that the Lahontan Regional Board adopted back in the early 70s or 80s. And so I think it's not fair to describe the E. coli standard the State Board adopted as protective of the beneficial use of water contact recreation, because it's not protective. It allows 32 per 1,000 people to get ill. And I don't find that acceptable. And I'm especially concerned that that we would apply that number to waters where, the individuals, there's just, like you said earlier, there's a lot of recreation in the Lahontan region. And I know that all the water bodies, or majority of the water bodies, are designated for water contact recreation. And yet we all kind of know there's different levels of recreation. But so I know you have a difficult assignment to try to figure this out, but I think I just think that it's wrong to really talk about that standard as being protective of human health. I get that the rest of the state of California has accepted that, but I don't find that acceptable in a region that values recreation as highly as it does. And the people that come from all over the world to this region expect a higher level of protection and a lower risk to water contact recreation. And I think that in areas where people are backpacking and relying on the water for drinking, there needs to be additional protection for them. People using handheld water filtration devices require a higher quality water to begin with, because you can't have as good a treatment when you're using a handheld device. So good luck, and thank you for having the workshop today.
Yeah, well, thank you for that comment, Laurie. It is appreciated. Thank you for recognizing that we do have a somewhat tricky assignment ahead of us, and that there are indeed high-value recreational waters in the region. But thank you for your participation. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Ed. And so we had one additional hand that was raised, and that was by Tina. Tina, do you still have a question? If so, if you still want to ask a question, if you can please raise your hand again. If not, we'll assume that during the course of this Q&A session, your question must have been answered. So if not, please feel free to raise your hand. Okay. It looks as if there are no additional questions or comments that are coming in.
Marina, I think I just saw
Yes.
a raised hand, actually. I think
Okay.
Miss Dunham.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. Tess Dunham. If you can please, again, introduce yourself and organization or agency you're working with or representing, and your question or comment.
Yes, thank you. Tess Dunham, Constories in Conway, and
Mhm.
representing some cattle interest in the Bridgeport Valley. This is just more of a process question with respect to providing follow-up comments based upon the Q&A session. Is there a time frame for which you would like us to submit those by?
Thanks, Tess. I think that's a really great point. You know, the sooner the better, but my email inbox and my phone is always open. Should, you know, several weeks from now, you have other comments or questions, I will be here. We are preparing for the November board meeting, as I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting tonight. That meeting is on the 18th and 19th. The plan is to present a variety of the project options to the board at that particular meeting. Being our process what it is, that document likely has to be final by September. So sometime before then, before the end of September, I wonder if Dan has the exact date. You know, I want to reiterate that I'm available. I would love to chat with you about these particular options and the process ahead of us. So any time is good. Of course, when we get into CEQA next year, there will be a bit more of a regimented time frame. I hope that goes some way to answering. It's probably not a very satisfying answer, but Dan, is there the date? Do you have the date handy in September where we might want to get things finalized ahead of November?
Yeah, thank you, Ed. This is Dan Sussman, Senior Environmental Scientist, Planning Assessment Unit of the Lahontan Water Board. And Ed is right. We are preparing for our November board meeting, November 18th and or 19th. Looking at our calendar, the end of September actually would be a great deadline. That gives us, you know, earlier than that, of course, would be better. But so that we are not scrambling to update what we are presenting to our board. But we do intend in November to, as part of our presentation materials, to provide to our board a representation of the different comments that we've heard during this outreach process, both today and leading up to that November board meeting. If we really want to include everything when we're telling our board, hey, these are the folks that are our interested parties, these are the parties that and interests that they represent, and these are their concerns or their ideas, then the end of September. Now, if you, Ed has mentioned several times, thankfully, that we are in the early stage. These options that we've presented are the options that we have. They are not all encompassing necessarily. And so if you reach out to us as an interested party and say, I like this one, but have you considered this tweak? Then that is, or here is a whole new option to consider. Obviously, with the earlier that we hear from you, the more ability that we have to bring it to our board in November, and to really get into the details so that we can answer questions about that moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dan. And again, last call for any folks to raise their hands if they have questions or comments they'd like to share now. If not, I will just encourage you to submit any additional comments or questions that to our team. You can still do so at the email address that's listed there. If you think of anything else after the session, please feel free to email Ed Hancock. We'll present his information at the end of today's workshop. So with this being said, if there are no additional questions or comments, we can move forward to close this section, this section. So I want to thank all of you so very much for your questions and your feedback. Your participation in this process is very important, and we thank you for the time that you took to join us virtually. A recording of this meeting will be available soon on the project website, as will the meeting minutes, and staff will develop an FAQ document based on today's discussion, which will also be available on the project website. Now I will hand the mic over to Ed to conclude this evening's meeting. Ed?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Marina. Sorry, I was just checking I wasn't on mute there. And I want to also take this moment to thank all those who logged in tonight to listen and those who participated in this meeting. Your feedback is as always, very valuable. As Marina said, and I want to acknowledge, there will likely be additional questions and comments regarding this topic, and I welcome your continued participation. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, please feel free to reach out to me directly via telephone or email. My contact information is available on the screen. There is also the dedicated project email address. I also want to take this moment to say that, staff are aware that there are likely other interested parties that were not able to participate today. So please forward the information presented to you today to them, including my contact information, and I will be happy to discuss any aspect of this project with those folks. And lastly, a plug for our LYRIS list, our email subscription list. If you have not yet signed up for the project email list, please take a moment to do so. It is the most efficient way for us to get in touch with you and for you to be kept up to date with developments for this process. The email subscription is available on the project website. The link to the website has been shared several times in these meeting notices, and it is also displayed on this current slide. And with that, I will once again thank you for your participation. I very much look forward to a time when we can discuss this project in person, and I look forward to working with you all to address the issues we have discussed this evening and move this project forward. So thank you all very much.